I'm Lisa Zenny. I'm with the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Greater Knoxville, and I hope you'll be hearing very little of me and my voice in the next hour. To my left here is Teresa Cameron. She's the Local Arts Agency Service Director at Americans for the Arts, and we're very glad that she made the trip here. Next is Lee Patton, who's with the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, and many of you know her when she was with the Arts Commission, the Tennessee Arts Commission. And we have Alan Bell, who's joining us from South Arts, and Molly Pratt, who very few of you know, who's with Pratt Government Strategies. Here's what we're going to do. Teresa has prepared a really interesting and informative PowerPoint. We're going to look at that PowerPoint presentation. She's going to fill us in, and then we're going to go on to Alan, who's also got some interesting statistics about Tennessee, statewide things. And then we're going to move to Lee, who has some things to offer. If you do nothing else, focus your advocacy on these things. And then Molly will be able to fill us all in on some of the ways that we can interweave what we do with other community efforts. And she'll also be covering, I'm sure, 2 or 3 other hemispheres. So,
I'm Teresa. I'm with Americans for the Arts. It's the largest national arts service organization, and some of you heard me yesterday, but this is not going to be a repeat. But I wanted to talk to you today about some of the strategies that you can use for advocacy and some of the numbers and tools that we have available nationally. So, first of all, common questions. Why do we need a statewide advocacy organization? Isn't that part of the Arts Council? No, and folks here will say no. Why do we need to be active? Isn't that just a job of a lobbyist? Advocacy is not my job. How many times have you heard that? Especially from your boards sometimes. I am not allowed to advocate. That is a myth, not true, and it won't matter anyway. Sort of sounds like some of our voters right now, but it does matter. So some of the myths and misperceptions. If we receive government funding, we cannot lobby at all. That is absolutely not the case, and it is your responsibility to advocate and lobby. We cannot use foundation funds for lobbying. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We cannot lobby a candidate for public office during an election season. Wrong again. Yes, you can. And a great quote from Napoleon Bonaparte, 10 people who speak make more noise than 10,000 who are silent. So I want to go on to tools that can make your case, but I threw some things out there that some of you might be bothered by the word lobbying or advocacy. There are so many ways that you can assist and help get the word out, and I really suggest that you take a look at Tennesseans for the Arts website and also the Council on Foundations and the Center for Nonprofit Management. They spell out the rules, and I don't have time to go through all the rules today, but I know that many of the folks here have talked about ways that you can advocate legally, but you can. Don't let people fool you into saying you cannot speak up, because you certainly can. What I want to talk about a little more are some tools that you can use that will help make your case, in particular, since I work with local communities across the country, locally. So the first thing is Americans for the Arts every few years does this Arts and Economic Prosperity Study. And some of you in the audience from Tennessee have participated. Thank you very much for doing that. And this is the first tool and most important tool you can use when you talk to elected officials. So it's the most comprehensive study of its kind to date. 182 study regions across the country, 50 states all participated. Also, the other piece of this that's unique is all of our organizations that participated in the study did audience surveys of their grantees. So we have a huge, huge database now of what our audience surveys look like, so audience members themselves. So another great thing when you talk to elected officials, and our Arts and Economic Prosperity Study shows how a dollar ripples through a community. Very simple to explain to people that you're trying to convince that it's important to support the arts. So you see a theater up there. The theater needs paint, right? They're going to buy it locally. They're going to go to the hardware store The guy's going to help him from the hardware store, and guess what? Some of the money from the paint's going to pay his salary. He's going to shop at the grocery store. All the wages he makes at the grocery store, the grocer, going to go to the milkman, who then takes his money home. So it's a great circle, and I can send you this PowerPoint, or you'll have it, but this is an easy way to explain how a dollar from the arts goes through a community. I love sports. I'm a huge ginormous sports fan, but I will tell you that when you talk about sports locally, generally the dollar does not go to buy that paint locally or the food locally. It goes to a national conglomerate. I think that's really important to point out that the arts really do trade locally. So the exciting thing about this economic impact study is we found it generated $135.2 billion to the economy. This is from nonprofit, not profit, but nonprofit arts and humanities organizations. Full-time equivalent jobs, we support 4.1 million jobs in the United States. Household incomes, $86.7 billion. Important things here. You talk to your mayor, local government revenue, $6.1 billion. Remember, the study does not include New York City either. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, that's New York. No, that is not the case with the study. State government revenue, $6.7 billion across the country. And, of course, federal income tax revenue, $9.6 billion. Now, I'm going to give you a quiz in a bit, so remember that number. 4.1 million employed. And how much now? How much of expenditures? $135.2 billion. So organizations, you guys, you who are running arts organizations, you spent $61.1 billion in your community. That's a lot across the country. This is a great slide. It's a little hard to read, but it's showing how many folks are employed in different areas. And the arts, the most employed in this will be teachers, but we're right in line with accountants, and then lawyers actually employ less people. So that's pretty exciting. So nonprofit arts attendees, they spend $24 per person per event. So, you know, when you go to an event, you got to pay for parking often, you have to pay for a babysitter, you go out and you have a nice meal, and of course you tip the valet if they parked your car. This doesn't include the ticket price, does not include the ticket price. And you can see that there's a little bit of a breakout through this donut, but you'll get this online. The other piece is that, as you can tell, local residents attended 68% more than non-residents, and that's always the case. But the exciting thing is, if you do have non-residents coming into your community, they spent an average of $39 on an event because they have to pay for a hotel, lodging, etc. One of the questions we ask people is, would you have come to this event if it wasn't in your community? Would you have gone somewhere else for it? And 41% of people said yes. They'd go somewhere else to see whatever it is. So audiences spent $74 billion on arts activities. Remember, it does not include New York. So this is pretty amazing that people have spent this much, and this is when the economy was down in the U.S. So organizations spent $61 billion, audience $74 billion. So what's the total economic impact? Oh, come on, you got to say louder than that. $135.2 billion. We're a big industry, guys. Can't forget that. So the other piece of this is, look at what happened in this time period when we did this. The last study was 2005. Our new study is 2010. All of these arrows are pointing down. And yet we still have $135.2 billion. Thank you. So arts volunteers, and this is another important piece. When you talk to your electeds in your community, look and talk about how many people are volunteering. The average community has 5,215 arts volunteers. Their value of hours is $4.3 million. Just think if we could get them jobs. Wouldn't that be great? The average organization has 45 volunteers who donated 72 hours, and I bet each one of you can think of those people in your community that do that, or you're one of them. The value of those volunteer hours is $21. If you're trying to assess how much you spend, how much your volunteers are contributing, it's $21 an hour. So the other piece about our study, a lot of people say, oh, economic impact, it's fluffy. Your mayor may say, this is like just, it's not. No, it's a very, very rigorous study. I can't tell you that enough. And because of that, we have partners who've signed on to this, and we've presented at all of their conferences as well. So the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Association of Counties, the Conference Board puts out the Leading Economic Indicator Study, National League of Cities, Grant Makers in the Arts. So when you talk about this to your electeds, you can say, look at how many people have signed on to this. U.S. Conference of Mayors, they're all members. So again, here we go, 5 takeaways. $135.2 billion. I don't want you to forget that. If you don't get anything from this conference, take that home. Generates $22.3 billion in government revenue. So what about if you didn't participate in our economic impact study, but you want to get a round number of roughly what the impact is in your community? You can go onto our website, and we have an Arts and Economic Prosperity Calculator. You can put in your numbers, you can put in your budget size, the total amount of expenses, what your population is, and it will give you at least a draft number, okay, which will be very helpful. So what are some other tools? I promised, so you can talk advocacy now with your elected officials around economic impact or economic impact and using advocacy, or vice versa. But there's some other tools that we have at Americans for the Arts, too, that will help you make your case. So we have a study that we do called Creative Industries. Remember I said our Arts and Economic Prosperity is for nonprofits? This is for profit industries. So if you can see, this is Tennessee. It's pretty, lots and lots and lots of dots. But basically, 16,197 arts-related businesses that employ over 59,000 people in Tennessee. We can give you this anytime you want it. We can break it down by county as well. It's our creative industry study. That's all your creative. So that's your, your design folks, people who are running for-profit galleries, all those things that not necessarily fit into the nonprofit industry. But that's another really big number to tell your electeds. And we can break it down by county. So you can tell your county official, which I did when I ran an arts council, look, we employ this many people. So some other things that we have on our website available, they're all one-pagers that you can use to help make your case. So arts and business, arts and community building, cultural tourism, we have lots of information, but they're one-pagers, so you can pull them out, take the information off, and use them to make your case. The one I like is arts education. We have a huge amount of arts education, arts and healthcare, and then one of the best ones we have is 10 reasons to support the arts. It's a basic 10 reasons, boom. So the last thing I want to talk about just quickly is that we are now embarking on a great program that's called our Partnership Program. And it's an initiative to work with for-profit industry businesses and leverage our message with them. So the Partnership Program is a website that is specifically designed, and we've been doing advertising. In fact, there's an ad in Forbes magazine this month about the Partnership Program, which it talks about how businesses can use the arts to help improve their businesses, to do job training, and we have lots of examples on the site. Now, how do you get, as an arts organization, your information out there to let your businesses know that you want to be, that you're part of this? Well, we have a whole ad campaign that is free that you can participate in, fantastic ads that you can use and customize to your location. And we can also have you go on our site, and as you can see, you can enter in and go and enter all the information about your organization. So if someone in Tennessee saw this ad in Forbes or saw it in a local paper that you put in, they can go in and they can see that, oh, Chattanooga Playhouse is doing a lot of work in terms of job training with this organization, or they can see examples around the country. We're really trying to build this up because one of the things that we believe also in advocacy is not just with the government, but with also our private citizens and especially people running businesses of all sizes. And we know the arts are the solution. So we want to be sure that you go on and take advantage of that. And it's just artspartnership.org. So hope that you'll do that. It's free to enter in your information. We're really just trying to stress that the arts are part of business and part of the solution. So this is our website, americansforthearts.org. And my email address is tcameron@artsusa.org. I'm happy to talk to you anytime about any of these numbers. We can also do a customized economic impact study for you if you want, but You know, our message is that we want you to use these numbers. And how much does the arts generate per year in the country? I got to hear it a little louder. Come on. Louder. Thank you, thank you. So I'm going to turn over to my colleague here who's going to tell you a little bit about more bringing it home to Tennessee. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. And if you guys look around your tables, you should have a sheet that looks like this. If you're out, then there's some more on some of the empty tables. This is kind of a two-page summary of the creative industries profile we did for Tennessee. You don't have to look at it right now. That's for you to take home with you. And then we also have resources on our website, and we'll give the website address at the end. But just wanted you to know this sheet does kind of give a summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I work with a group called South Arts. We're a 9-state regional arts organization. We do grants in performing arts and literary arts. We also have a emergency preparedness and business continuity planning program called Arts Ready. The website for that is artsready.org. We also do a conference called Folklorists in the South, another called the Performing Arts Exchange. We have some touring exhibitions, and then recently with our new strategic plan, we started doing research. And we released this study back in January of 2012. And so it took us about 18 months to conduct the study. It includes 9 states, a 9-state region represented by South Arts, and that includes Tennessee. The study is based on 2007 data from the Economic Census, which is administered by the U.S. Census Bureau, as well as non-employer statistics, and then nonprofit numbers from the National Center for Charitable Statistics. The full report is 210 pages. Again, we did a state summary for each state that's between 12 and 15 pages, and then we have a 2-page summary for each state. For the South Arts region as a whole, the creative industries represent 83,000 establishments, about 1.2 million people employed, $41.4 billion in annual wages and earnings, and then about $142.6 billion in annual revenues. And so then we get into our breakdown of the numbers for Tennessee. As you can see, the creative industries in the state represent about 7,941 businesses. Again, the numbers that we're working with here, this particular graph, when we talk about establishments, just includes for-profits and nonprofits. It does not include the self-employed or government, although our other pie charts do include numbers from the self-employed. And then also, if you notice, so we have the pie chart kind of divided into different segments of the creative industries. The blue is design. The red is film and media. Green, the little slice there, is heritage and museums. Purple is literary and publishing. Teal-ish is performing arts. And visual arts and crafts is orange. One note I want to make about heritage and museums, you see that slice of the pie is pretty small. That's in part because a lot of heritage and museums numbers would be captured within government data because they are either local, state, or federal government organizations, and so they wouldn't be included in nonprofit and for-profit figures. So we more or less feel like the heritage and museums numbers are an undercount, but we didn't want to leave them out altogether either. But as you can see, there's kind of an even breakdown, except for heritage and museums, between the various creative industries sectors. And then in terms of employment, creative industries in Tennessee employ about 135,000 people. As you can see, the 2 pie slices that grew the most were literary and publishing and film and media, which are the more or less the 2 largest creative industry sectors in Tennessee, even though Tennessee is really well known for music and performing arts. The film and media and literary and publishing sectors are even larger. All right, so this represents earnings by the self-employed as well as wages for those who work for for-profits and nonprofits in the creative industries in Tennessee, and that's right at $5 billion a year. Again, you can see about $1.7 billion of that is from literary and publishing, about $1.2 billion from film and media, and then another $900 million or so from performing arts. And then in terms of total revenues, the creative industries in Tennessee represent just about $17 billion in annual revenue for the for-profits, nonprofits, and the self-employed, which is a pretty significant figure. Again, you can see that the literary arts represent about $6.6 billion in annual revenue, or literary and publishing, rather. And that makes it a really significant industry for the state. Film and media at about $4 billion, and then performing arts at about $3.2 billion. Comparing industry clusters, in terms of number of establishments, creative industries are the fourth largest industry cluster in the state. They're behind business and financial services, biomedical and biotechnical, and energy, but they're larger than information technology and telecommunications, transportation and logistics, defense and security, forest and wood products, manufacturing, and advanced materials. And then in terms of total employment, creative industries rank roughly 7th among all industry clusters in the state. And then in terms of total wages, creative industries rank 8th among industry clusters in the state. And just to give you a sense for how some of these different categories break down in terms of specific industry sectors within each of our larger categories within the creative industries, you can kind of see this breakdown. The largest number of establishments is among radio, television, and electronic stores, followed by jewelry stores, florists, videotape and disc rental, musical groups and artists, photography studios, and so on. And we move to employment. And you can see Tennessee has a lot of writers. And that contributes to some of the larger numbers among literary and publishing. Also in literary and publishing would be included the commercial lithographic printing, newspaper publishers, and then some of these other radio, television, and electronic stores would be included in film and media. Photography studios we include in visual arts. Independent performers, of course, would be in the performing arts. Advertising agencies also fall under film and media, as does cable and other program distribution. The architectural services and jewelry both fall under design. Then we look at compensation. The largest sector for total employee compensation in the state is commercial lithographic printing at about $362 million a year, closely followed by independent writers at around $347 million a year. And then we get to revenue, and the largest revenue generator among the industry sectors is book, periodical, and newspaper merchant wholesalers, which again contributes to that large segment of the literary and publishing industry, as well as commercial lithographic printing at about $1.3 billion. Newspaper publishers from the literary and publishing are also fairly large. Among the nonprofit arts organizations in Tennessee, we break those out from the rest of the numbers within the study. And there are about almost 1,700 registered nonprofit arts organizations. This includes arts, culture, and humanities. 655 of those organizations filed Form 990 in 2007. Again, this is all 2007 data. And those organizations that filed 990s reported about $345 million in revenue and about $1 billion in assets. And then looking at Tennessee in comparison to the rest of the states in our region, based on per capita, Tennessee ranks third in creative industries establishments, first per capita in employment, and then second per capita in both compensation and revenue for the total creative industries. And then within the specific sectors, Tennessee ranks high in heritage and museums compared to the other states, especially high in literary and publishing, and then also I believe it's definitely in terms of per capita, it's the highest in performing arts, but sometimes just in the general numbers, it's higher in performing arts. Well, Florida, since they have 18 million people, tends to be number one in terms of totals, right? Kind of across the board. But they have 18 million. Georgia and North Carolina both have about 9 million. I believe Tennessee has about 6 million people. So a lot of times because of the population differences, we get kind of a truer measure of kind of density of a certain industry based on the per capita data. We drew various conclusions from the study. Definitely based on these figures, the creative industries are a major component of Tennessee's economy. They represent one of the largest industry clusters in the state. To continue to grow the creative industries, there definitely needs to be some policy development and work focused on the creative industries. This conference is a good start. Of course, resources are required to encourage this development. And then here are a few of our policy considerations. I was supposed to be at 10 minutes. So. Okay, so in terms of feedback and follow-up, our full report, the executive summary of the report, the 12 to 15-page state summary, and the 2-page state summaries are all on our website. It's southarts.org/creative economies. And then if you guys have any specific questions, you can always email me at southarts@abel@southarts.org. I think we'll do question and comments after everybody goes. So other than that, thank you.
Hi. Is it close enough? Can you all hear me? I believe that I'm sitting up here because of my privilege of serving with many of you all as a program director at the Tennessee Arts Commission. I know many of you from my tenure there, and now I'm at the Metro Nashville Arts Commission and working with another roughly 75 to 80 grant applicants a year. I really am not a research wonk, so I'm not going to even try to talk about numbers. What I talked with Lisa about before we started this panel was those items that really come up over and over again with organizations when they're trying to write a grant and talk about their advocacy. And so these points that I just wanted to kind of share with you come out of that experience that I have with reviewing your hundreds, if not a couple thousand grants over the past 7 or 8 years. Could I get a show of hands of who represents a nonprofit arts organization that's funded by a government entity, either Metro Arts or the Tennessee Arts Commission? Raise them high. Okay, so a lot of you. Well, I think this applies to most everyone as well, but I'll focus a little bit on grantees because that's my world. So I think it's really important to know that I personally hate the word advocacy, mainly because it seems like something different in addition to what you're doing. But the fact is, everything that we do is advocating for our beliefs in the importance of the arts. So although everything that we do is arts advocacy, we have to be very mindful of effective strategies to be good advocators. A couple of things that I wanted to talk about are what grant makers are looking for when they ask you to talk about your advocacy efforts. I can't tell you how many times I received an application from a grantee at the state level when I worked for the Tennessee Arts Commission who would talk a lot about their local advocacy. And while there is an enormous spectrum of advocacy and your work at the local level is very important, what I wanted to know about as a state program director was what you were doing at the state level, because fundamentally I wanted to know, how are you closing that cycle of awareness with those people that ultimately fund these grants that you're getting? So if I had a PowerPoint, you would see this big cycle, and there would be these points of the grantees, and there would be the funder, and there would be the elected officials, and then there would be the budget process that those elected officials need to hear from you about so that they can come back and approve the funding for the State Arts Commission. So, sorry you don't have the visual, but do you get what I'm saying? I mean, it's a cycle, and without that portion of your representing what you get from the State Arts Commission, then your elected officials have less information than they could possibly have when they come to vote on the Tennessee Arts Commission's budget. And the same goes for a local government agency like Metro Nashville Arts Commission, although there are only a handful of government arts agencies in the state, so I'm probably not talking to a lot of folks who are receiving grants from a local government agency. But I think it's important to remember who you're talking to and who you're appealing to when you are writing your applications, and focus your efforts. Maybe give a broad perspective. This is what we do sort of overall, but this is what's important to the funder that you're talking to at the time. Excuse me. Something else that really helps close that cycle of awareness is use of logos. Now, most of you know that using logos for your funders and whatever contracts you create with your sponsors and your donors is usually contractually obligated. But when I see one of my grantees at the Metro Arts Commission not use our logo when they're promoting something that they're doing that we know we funded, then I have a conversation with that grantee. And I say, here's the thing. When the local council person picks up that program or sees that poster or something like that, they need to know that it was funded by Metro Arts, because when we go through another budget cycle, they're not going to know exactly what the impact of the funding is that they're voting on. So logos are a really easy way to make sure that you are continually promoting the source of those funds, and it shouldn't feel like an obligation. For you all, I just strongly recommend that you think of it as a way to continue to ensure the possibility that you're going to get funded, because it's not really our funding. It just flows through us to you. And then I also would recommend that you treat your government funders as sponsors. Not necessarily, treating them like VIPs, but in your promotions and marketing. That you treat the Tennessee Arts Commission and the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, anybody else that you receive funding from, as a sponsor in outward appearance, because ultimately that's what they are, and that's what will help you understand how much you need to really spend some time closing that cycle or that circle of awareness. So another thing that has come up a lot of times, and I think this is where it applies to a broader group than just grantees, is how do you talk to elected officials? And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but if anybody's nervous about talking to elected officials, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about, what you're feeling. We often tell our grantees that you should put your elected officials on your mailing lists. Something that we don't do is we don't tell you to update those mailing lists so that you no longer are sending something to someone who's not been an elected official for many years with their title. Keep them on your mailing list for sure, but we see that a lot. And then also just make sure you invite them to your events, because not only does that just keep up that awareness that they know you're getting funded by your organization, your government entity, but it also allows them the opportunity to engage with their constituents if you're in their district. But something that occurred to me recently that I really wanted to share with you all is that obviously you know that advocacy is a nonpartisan experience. It doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are. You should know who your representatives are. So I get caught up in politics and I think I don't like that person. But the fact is they represent my district, so I need to know what they're interested in and what they're doing and what their priorities are. So I get on everybody's mailing list. If any of your elected officials at the local, state, or federal level do blogs, or they, send out periodic email updates, get on those. And the reason is, I'll give you a personal story. I'm on Jim Cooper's mailing list, and I get all of his updates that he sends out, and I see him around Nashville, and every once in a while, I've been close enough to him. Now, he doesn't know me he doesn't know where I work. He doesn't know me by sight. But every once in a while, I've said, Representative Cooper, I really appreciate your sending out that note about something. And it really doesn't require me to come up with something new to say to him. I can just have that little tiny conversation, and I've made that connection. So getting on their mailing lists allows you to follow their interests and their priorities and gives you something to talk to them about. If you're nervous about saying things to elected officials that are inappropriate about the arts, then you are not alone. But there are a number of experts to my left and right, and then others as well who can give you talking points. So there are many, many resources for talking points. Teresa, covered a lot of this for Americans for the Arts. But the Tennesseans for the Arts is a great resource for talking points specifically about Tennessee. Molly will talk in a few minutes about this as well. The Tennessee Arts Commission is another good resource. Americans for the Arts, even the NEA, and then of course South Arts. So you can do a little homework, find out what you're comfortable talking about, and then have that sort of in your back pocket like an elevator speech. And then my final point is about building relationships. And I don't know about you, but I hear build relationships, and relationships are key, to the point that it's almost like white noise now. I mean, relationships. But the thing that just really has sort of become clear to me recently, working at the local level instead of the state level, is that it really is important to be able to speak to someone else on a specific topic. So those relationships become critical to moving forward. Now, two people really can't get a lot done in a community, so you do have to broaden that into a committee or a council or involve partners or collaborators. But I think that those relationships, if you're like me, stop thinking of it as white noise and really start thinking of the people that you know, or the people that you know who know people, and get them to introduce you to the people that you need to know. And also another thing, my family has lived all over Tennessee, but I understand, and also working with the Artsville Communities program over the years, I got to know a lot more rural communities. And I think in a lot of places, a lot of people feel sort of disenfranchised, both as artists or art supporters, or as maybe outside of the quote-unquote good old boy network. And the thing that I've seen over and over again, both in Nashville, so this is relative to urban areas, and in rural areas, is that you just have to stop feeling like an outsider and start showing up and sitting at the table. So if it's a good old boys network, join them. Just join them. And I don't care if you're a short little 41-year-old white girl like me, just show up. And it seems to work. And if I had more time, I could give you some examples of that. But I think that people respect that when you show up and you're not, pounding your chest, or you're not complaining, or you're not crying about the things that, make you miserable, but that you're just showing up and you're saying, I'm here, I'm an equal partner, and I want to have a conversation about planning in this community, about problem solving in this community, about impacting this community. And I have two quotes for you. I know that you all have probably heard me say this many dozens of times since 2008. When we had a conference, the Tennessee Arts Commission had a conference in Franklin, and William Cleveland, who's the director of the the Center for Arts and Community, and also a great writer, he gave a keynote speech. If you were there, you remember he sang some songs. He's a fascinating person, but in a small session, he talked about arts people stopping that concept of really begging to be included. And his quote was, "Get off your knees." And I think that is just so, it's so picturesque. You're not sitting there saying, "What can you do to help me?" or "Please help me. I am valid. I am a valuable part of this community," but rather pull up a chair and say, "What are we talking about today?" And the other one is something that Marin shared with me on the way down here from Nashville, and I asked her if I could share it with you all in this setting. She was telling me about a blind sculptor in Massachusetts named Heidi. And this turning point for Heidi in advocacy was when she realized that she was really angry about her disability and about how she was treated as a blind artist and as a blind person. And she said, "I realized," this is Heidi quoting, I'm quoting, "I realized that anger is not advocacy." And I would say also, anger is not advocacy, complaining is not advocacy, whining is not advocacy, ignoring is not advocacy, all of the, ignoring the things that you don't like is not advocacy, but rather engaging and showing up. So, I have lots more to say, but I am going to turn the mic over to Molly. If you don't know Molly, let me introduce Molly. I think probably she's brand new. I love that joke, by the way. I'm going to use that. Thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Can y'all hear me from... I'm not standing up. Can y'all... Does this work now? Can you hear me from here? I'm delighted to be here today. And I wish that there was... I'm a little discombobulated because Lee said something that I thought was really important and I wanted to redo. And my pen's not working. And I've been sitting over here scribbling, trying to remember what it was, and for the life of me, I don't know. But you said something very important, and so maybe it'll come to me in a minute. One of the things that, and I want to thank my colleagues up here because I think that what they've shared with you is really, really important, and because I think that as we move forward, we need to be fully equipped to do advocacy in the very best way. And so I think that being armed with facts and figures is something that we all need to do work on. We need to gather those from other sources that have been done in a reliable fashion, or we need to, and we need to understand the parameters in which they were collected and done. So if we're asked a question, we can speak knowledgeably about it, not just hang it on a group somewhere else. But we also need to do our own due diligence on our own organizations and our own economic impacts and drill down as far as we possibly can. Because I think that there's a broad spectrum in advocacy, and I will tell you that I think I'm gonna refer to it as a three-legged stool, and I think that's one of the legs, and I think it's a very important leg. And I think that you can put it in context at the national, at the regional, at the state, but at the local level. And I think that in many ways, even though the state numbers are important when we talk about, and I'm going to talk primarily about the General Assembly, but I also know that this goes down into local government, into county government, into the municipal government. And the reason why I'm going to tell you this is because it can be tailored to your audience. It can be used as a segue. It can be used as a point counterpoint. It's just tools for your toolbox. I'm also going to tell you that this three-legged stool called advocacy, there's a second leg. And as important as these facts and figures are in making us sound like we are professional, that we are organized, that we are competent and qualified business people, whether we're nonprofit business or we're for-profit business, is the whole notion that we need to be able to tell our story alongside those figures. I think it started back in the 80s when Ronald Reagan began to bring people to the State of the Union address, and he would introduce them to the audience. And I don't think there's a single president or presidential candidate from that point on that doesn't learn the lesson that to make things come to life for people, to humanize what we're there to talk about, is an important ingredient in advocacy. So whether that is the story of Mary or John or the at-risk child whose name you're going to share, or an elderly person who has been brought back through a relationship and therapy at the hospital with art hospice people coming in, whatever it is, making it personal is also a very key, important part of the formula. And then the third-legged part of the stool, this is for Lee. That's white noise for you all that didn't know it. I'm going to make a big point of that because I don't care what your facts and your figures are. I don't care what great stories you have. The final and most important part of the stool that's got to be, if not equal, the strongest leg is relationships. This is a relationship game. And for the arts community, that should be very easy because art is very personal. It's creative. It's tapping into creativity. And all of those things are very personal things. And how we communicate with people, how we tell those stories, how we relay those facts. I would suggest that we've heard a lot about assets and taking asset inventories. I think it's very important for you all to consider that your advocacy efforts need to have assets. What do you call them? Inventories. Done just the same way you would about what else is going on in your community. And by that what I mean is, first and foremost, you need to know, like they were talking about, looking around and seeing what your assets are. Well, you need to look around and kind of determine what your government relations landscape looks like. And then you need to look at who those people are and what your relationship is with them. I mean, I'm going to make a big assumption here, and I'm going to get everybody off the hook, because I'm going to assume that everyone in this room knows who their particular elected official is. I would hope that after many, many arts advocacy days and us making the white noise and the yelling and jumping and screaming and everything else, that everyone here can tell me that if I were to ask you. And I'm also going to assume that you might not be quite sure, because in less than 2 weeks you may be in a district where there's an election underway and there may be an open seat and someone may be running for, maybe someone was beat in the primary. So there are a few reasons why you might be off the hook here. But generally speaking, by next, if you don't know now, I'm not going to embarrass you, but by next, Wednesday next, somebody needs to know. You need to wake up the day after the election and figure out who those people are. And then I would suggest that if you work with an organization or have staff and board members, that you all sit down and shortly after the election, that you do your own asset review of the relationships that you have and the knowledge that you have and little thumbnail kind of IDs of who these people are. Do a little due diligence, do a little research. Because that's, I think, the first step towards building that relationship. And I think that relationship's extremely important. And, a lot of you all know, many, many years ago, I worked for Lamar Alexander when he was governor. And there was a brilliant man named Doug Bailey. And Doug Bailey has always been given credit for a black and red plaid shirt that Lamar used when he walked across the state in 1978. And there's a funny story that goes with that, but I don't have a lot of time. So let me just say that Doug Bailey, it was and it still is, a brilliant man, and just one of the smartest men I ever knew. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., some years later after I'd first met Doug, I spent some time with him, and he was interested in helping me look for work in Washington. And he very wisely said to me at that point, you know, Molly, there are a lot of people in this town that I can help you with. And there was a time in my life when I was very young and very cocky. And he actually has a huge ego, but he's quite charming. And he said, but now I'm much wiser, and I've realized that in some cases, some of the people in this town that I can help you most with are those that you never mention my name to. Get it? You know, he's like explaining that he doesn't have the very best relationship in terms of advancing something forward. And so, just because you know someone, just because you live near someone, that's why you want to do this asset identification. And hopefully the people that are part of your organization will have Doug Bailey's humility and will tell you, the best way I can help you with this person is for you not to mention my name, but this is how you need to go and see them. The best way for you to get to this person is it's really important to them to understand that their primary reason for being in the legislature is education. You need to frame your story around that. You need to sit down with your staff. You need to sit down with your friends, your volunteers, your trusted board people, and you need to begin to make that list and make those assessments and figure out when and who the best people are. Because that's the way you really develop the relationships. That's how you get in to see people. That's how you find out who do they take the call from, who has their cell number. And then finally, you also have to remember that there may be other people in the community that those people are close to. They may not be on your board. They may be donors. They may be supporters of the arts in general. That's when you begin to realize that the collaborations are important in advocacy as well. And that's when it begins to be important to figure out how you can network, and like we learned yesterday, whether they're an acquaintance, whether they're a partner, whether they're in a coalition. And I think that it's also very important for you all to realize that in all these continuums of where the dollar came from and Lee's circular description of where those resources were, there's one part of that circle that you all should not forget in your advocacy, and that is the license plate. Because this morning, there were extraordinary numbers up here, I think it was this morning, it may have been yesterday, that said, when I first went on the Arts Commission, Tennessee was in the high 30s, and we thought that was pretty good. That was in 1990-something. Tennessee is now 11th in per capita spending for the arts. I'm not sure, because I know we're number one in prescriptions, which is not a good thing. But I think that number 11, in terms of things that are measurements that state governments look at and talk about and are proud of, may be, I would put this industry and this community up against anybody out there that is getting ranked nationally, state by state, and have a more important or a more compelling story to tell members of the Tennessee General Assembly. And the reason why, and I'm going to tell you this, it's a double-edged sword, so be very careful when you listen to what I tell you, is because of the specialty license plate program. States all around us, states all over this country, states that have traditionally been huge art and culture machines have been slashed, cut, burned, messed over, and some are not. Some have been bloodied to the point where they're barely limping or crawling along. And we have gone from, in less than 15 years, from 40-something, 42 maybe, to 11. Now, this is not a magic formula, but it is a wonderful funding mechanism which we must protect. And that is why advocacy is so key, and that is why developing the people for whom we are advocating to, the message has to be honed in a way that makes them want to protect that formula. And that's the whole purpose of Tennesseans for the Arts. So one of the things that we're supposed to talk about here today, and I think it's really important, is not only figuring out what message would be appealing to the people we're advocating to, but who are some of the other stakeholders that are not necessarily arts groups and organizations who could be our partner in this advocacy effort. Anybody have an idea of who I'm thinking about? Oh, come on. Come on. No? Well, let's go back. Now, let's think about this. I'm going to sound kind of sassy here. But what did I just tell you about? It's not about the economy. It's about the license plate, right? Well, guess what? We're in the catbird seat when it comes to license plates because after a certain point in time, every license plate that goes into production, even if it doesn't have arts on it, we get a benefit from that. New specialty license plates, too, belong to lots of people in Tennessee. And they are selling those plates with their friends, their supporters, their colleagues, their race for the cure when they're loading up hundreds of 100,000 racers on Sundays and Saturdays in October. Just went out there to raise money for breast cancer research and a pink license plate, which is about the number 4 seller in this state. And for every single one of those plates and for every single one of those passionate advocates, guess what? The Tennessee Arts Commission, which ultimately means you all, gets 40% of that $35 plate. It's golden. Now, if somebody out there is a member of the General Assembly, and there are people in your community, and Susan G. Komen's all over the state, and Lisa's been very successful in doing this in Knoxville, so here's an example that really works, we can tell you. It's pretty nice when they promoted the plate on race day, and the Susan G. Komen people put things that promoted license plates in all of the bags that they handed out in the special VIP tent. There are ways to collaborate. And it's not just in the programming side of things. There are those ways too. And that's what you heard from a lot more expert than Molly Pratt on yesterday about building those relationships. But there are lots of groups and organizations. You can go on Tennesseans for the Arts website and you can look at every specialty tag out there. And you can know the ones that produce funds to the tune of 40% of their total sales. You can look, if it's not on there, and it may not be because it shifts around a little bit, you can figure out who the top selling plates are. You can think about your programming. You can think about the volunteers in your community. You can maybe even think about the fact that some of those people in a non-traditional way may be good people to have on your board or serve on a committee to talk about access issues if it's health related. There are all kinds of groups and organizations out there, and I would really encourage you because it all twists back to the bottom line, which is we all have lots of individual reasons to advocate for the arts, but from Tennesseans for the Arts perspective, the one thing that galvanizes all of us are those license plates. So you can buy a license plate yourself. That's great. That's one person. You can buy license plates for your family. That's another very manageable and very affordable way you can help. You can promote license plates to your board of directors and explain to them why it's important. You can use the resources of those plates to develop incredible programs to share and tell stories to your legislators and your elected officials, and you can use that resource to help you develop the kinds of programs that are going to allow you to advocate for the arts in your community. You can develop relationships with those elected officials and also with those non-traditional partners who are also key to the sale of specialty license plates in Tennessee, and you can promote license plates in that way too. It's much better to buy an arts plate. It's much better to buy an arts plate and specialize it. We get a lot of that money, almost 5% of it. But I don't think any of us are going to turn our nose up at 40% of something. 40% of $35 plus the entire amount if they personalize it, except for what it costs to personalize, which I think brings it down to like $32. That's a lot of money out there that we can promote. Let me also leave you with this number. 6 million cars registered in the state of Tennessee. Anybody want to guess how many specialty tags there are? Oh, come on. About right. Okay, not high math here. 6 million cars, 2 million plates. What's left? 4 million people out there could still buy a specialty tag. How much money is generated for arts groups and organizations out of specialty license plates every year? How much? Okay. Did you hear that? Ann Pope just happened to know. Did y'all hear the number? You don't have to do the math there either. 4.6 million a year. That's not anything to sneeze at. So I'm not telling you that advocating for the arts generally is not important. I just want to encourage you to think about how you can, because it seems to me that if you have a win-win-win-win-win all the way around, that it makes you feel a little bit better about having to go out there and get up off your knees. So it seems to me that, the one thing I'll tell you is that explaining the importance of the license plate to elected officials is critical. Making them understand why it's important and why the formula shouldn't change is equally important. But the Arts Caucus and me on a daily basis kind of have that handled for you. I mean, you can encourage them not to change the formula, and that should be part of your message. But just letting them know. The other thing is in this time of economic sort of uncertainty, this is a designated source of revenue. It's a designated source of revenue that's choice. People don't have to do it. And we have argued successfully for a long time that because people make a choice, it is not a revenue source or a revenue stream that is subject to being grabbed back, no matter how times get tough, back into the general fund. So it is a protected, dedicated source of revenue. And I think that that protected, designated source of revenue earns our protection by giving us a common cause to go out and advocate for, to prepare ourselves with our stories so people don't want to mess with it because they see the good that it does, to add on those numbers that let people see the huge benefit that this is giving to people as a freebie for local governments and state governments and everything else. Because guess what? That's not something they're having to struggle with. That's something that people are choosing to do. It's a great story. It's easy to sell. It's helping a lot of other people than just the arts. It may lead in those opportunities when you begin to form collaborations into some innovative non-art programming that could use the arts. Think about the healthcare. Think about the scouting. Think about the Boys and Girls Clubs. Think about the Federated Garden Clubs. Think about all those people out there that either have plates or want to get plates, and how your efforts in conjunction with theirs, in the end, they're doing the heavy lifting. They're selling the plate. And you're getting 40% of it. Pretty good deal.
Thank you, Molly.